Hey, good morning guys, I'm the Tech Prepper, hope you're all doing well. Today we're going to continue our series on no random contacts, and we're going to take a little step back again and talk about community, city, and hopefully county-wide communication using simplex communication. And all that means is we're going to try to do radio-to-radio communication with no intermediate infrastructure in between. So it's a little bit different than what we did in part 2 with the repeaters. We're going to eliminate that portion. So if there is an off-grid scenario, we're basically going to be golden. Now, the mission objective is going to be quite simple. We're going to try to establish a VHF communication to a known quantity, my Elmer mic, WB4ZKA, and we're going to attempt to do it from my home to his home, and that's a distance of 41 miles point to point, and that is fairly lengthy in terms of what is technically possible with line of sight or just beyond line of sight communication with VHF, but we're going to try it anyhow. Now, I'm a firm believer in training with the gear that you have. So this is my everyday carry radio. It is the Yaesu VX6R, and I'm going to train with it with the antenna I use most often. And I know this is not the greatest antenna in the world, but I'll explain why I'm actually sticking with the rubber duck antenna for most of my personal applications. The other thing we're going to do is we're also going to try it with my backup antenna. Again, there's a reason why I use the Comet BNC24. We'll get into that after this exercise. And then to make things fun, since the communication is, or the distance is so far between us, 41 miles, I don't think these are going to work. So we're going to make use of a directional antenna. We'll talk about that too. That's positioned about 16 feet off the ground outside the house, and also test it with this radio. Now, I want to make the point that not all radios are equal. This is only a 5-watt radio. So right behind me in the shack, I have my Yaesu FT2980R. That is a mobile rig designed to be put in your vehicles, but I actually run it in my shack. And the cool thing about that rig is it has 4 different power settings: 5 watts, 10 watts, 30, and 80. And we're going to basically run the same simplex test to see if we're able to get better performance or even make the contact altogether. So stick around for that. We'll do our exercise, and then of course we'll do our after action report. Hopefully we're going to learn something new. All right, see you guys in a bit. All right, guys, let's go ahead and try our first test. 5 watts with the rubber duck. WB4ZKA, K21RUN. I think this is a negative copy, but let's try one more time. WB4ZKA, K21RUN, transmitting on the VX6R at 5 watts with the rubber ducky. Yeah, this is a no-go. I knew this was going to happen. All right, let's try another test with the VX6R, this time with the Comet BNC24 antenna. It's one of my standard antennas. WB4ZKA, this is K21RUN, running 5 watts on the VX6R with the BNC24 antenna. Do you copy? Another bust. Let's go ahead now, and what we're going to do is connect this guy to our high gain Yagi antenna, and we'll talk more about that in a second. All right, folks, we're going to go ahead now and use the same VX6R, but we're going to connect it to the Yagi outside. WB4ZKA, K21RUN, running the VX6R, 5 watts with the Yagi. That was a negative copy, but I did hear you come back. We're going to move on to test number 4, K21RUN. Well, the antenna helps. Let's go ahead now and switch over to this bad boy. This is the FT2980R. Just got to switch out the antenna, power this bad boy on. Let's go ahead and see how this works. All right, guys, I've taken the antenna feed line back off of the VX6R and put it back on the FT2980R. Let's see if we can get a hold of him. WB4ZKA from K21RUN, I'm running the FT2980 at 5 watts with the Yagi. How do I copy?
Good afternoon, Gaston. I copy you S2. I say again, S2 signal strength. You are communication grade. I recognize your voice and can understand virtually all of your words. Well done.
Well, Mike, you are almost full scale, almost full quieting. There's a little hiss on your end. I can actually hear you this time with the Yagi. I was not able to hear you with the rubber duck. Back to you.
And I believe you, on test number 3, you had a different radio on the Yagi. And apparently the receiver on that HT is not nearly as sensitive as your FT2980.
Very good, Mike. I'm going to go ahead, and while I have you here, I'm going to go ahead and bump up the power to 10 watts with all of the other factors remaining. Stand by. Guys.
Roger.
All right, so we're going to go to 10 watts. All right, Mike, we're running 10 watts now. Has my signal improved? That would warrant a better signal report. Back to you.
Gaston, your signal is now solidly an S3. Doubling your power, according to theory, only increases your mic perceived reception by 1/2 S unit. So whereas you were S2 that floating to S3 occasionally, now you're solidly S3. And still easily understood and understand virtually every syllable.
Let's go ahead and increase power on him. All right, we're at 30 watts. Mike, I have increased power to 30 watts. And be advised, you are a solid S7 since we have transitioned to the 2980. Again, just a little bit of hiss, but you are 100% full grade communication. How do I sound at 30 watts? Back to you.
Much better. You are S4, which is about what you expect from the theory. You have doubled, which gives you another 1/2 S unit and a little more. So you are solidly at S4, which is blanking yet more of the noise out of the channel. And your audio is still just fine. Easy communication grade. WB4 ZKA.
All right, guys, I'm going to stick my ugly mug in here. We're going to try 80 watts. Let's go ahead and do this now. Very good, Mike. I really do appreciate the report and the little bit of lesson for all the newbies on the channel. I am now killing birds properly with the beam and running full 80 watts on this rig. How do I sound? Back to you.
You are S5 solidly, which means even less noise on the channel. Easy communication grade, and likely you're dimming the lights on your end. Now I'm pushing 50 watts and have been for the entire experiment. I've not changed anything. And I believe what we have learned is your VX6R is handy for very strong signals and local communication, but lacks either the receive sensitivity or the selectivity. It may be deafened by other signals that off channel that are coming down the coax from the Yagi.
All right, guys, let's jump into an after action report. So that exercise was very successful, and I learned something new about my HT that I did not know before. So very thrilled with what came out of that. Let's talk about what we actually solved. So we were able to establish a 41-mile simplex contact between my home location and the target station, which was my Elmer mic. I didn't think it was really going to be possible. We basically had to make use of some higher gain antennas and more power, but we'll get into all of that in a second. The way we coordinated this was pretty straightforward. I always like to coordinate a day, an hour, that the other party will be on the air. We did that all over, I believe it was text messaging and then maybe a phone call a few days before. And then in terms of establishing a simplex frequency, all we did was look at our Arizona State band plan and went to the section where they have a bucket of allocated simplex frequency ranges. And we just picked one that was unused. In our case, we used 147.550. And we picked it because the nationwide simplex frequency is common to pretty much everybody, and there would probably be other stations that would be competing and interfering with this exercise. And I didn't publish the frequency in advance. So we picked a day and then we picked an hour to go ahead and try for that contact. Let's talk about our stations a bit. So Mike was operating out of his home and he had a base station mobile rig. I think it's the Yaesu FT 8800. He was running 50 watts and he had a vertical antenna on his roof with about 30 feet of feed line. So he was already operating on kind of the upper end of his capabilities based on his antenna height above ground and the capabilities of having a more powerful radio. On my end, for our first test, I wanted to use and test the radio that I carry with me every day. It's my everyday carry radio, and it's the Yaesu VX6R. Number two, I wanted to test it with the antenna I normally run on it, and I will get a lot of criticism, but I like running the stock rubber duck antenna, and it's just a personal preference based on how I use this radio. This radio is IP67 rated, which means it is water resistant up to a depth of 1 meter for 30 minutes, and I have done a proper swim in the pool with this underwater, and it survived. Now, the reason why I don't change out this antenna is that in general, this antenna performs well enough for me to get into my local repeaters, but it also is designed where it does not compromise the integrity of anything getting into the radio, and that's why I run it. So make your own decision. I know people will say, well, you should put a signal stick on there or whatever, diamond antenna. Fine. I have run all of those and they don't work as well for me based on the fact that I run around the desert and I sweat and get salt and moisture in these radios. So this first test, we did this outside. I keyed up and he did not hear anything. So that test failed. Was not surprised. The second test, I went ahead and used my SMA to BNC connector or adapter and my Comet BNC 24 antenna. Now, the reason why I chose this antenna is that this is the antenna I use with all of my man packs when I want to run VHF up to about 20 watts. So I have about 10 of these and they're in all of my packs and they actually stow away pretty easily and compact. So again, not the most performant antenna, but it's the antenna that I have and use, so I want to flex it. So I keyed up, we ran 5 watts, nothing. I was pretty sure that was going to be the case. The third test, I have a directional antenna and I have it up about 16 feet and I had it pointed at 169 degrees southeast, which is Mike's bearing. So for you guys that are new, these vertical antennas are good at radiating RF kind of in an omnidirectional pattern, like a big halo. So they're good at kind of picking up everything and they're okay at kind of spreading their RF in multiple directions. The Yagi, on the other hand, will actually redirect and funnel all of that RF energy in one location. And it has the happy consequence that when you do that, you get a little bit more power directed at the station you want to talk to, but you also cut out a lot of the noise on the reception side, on other sides, like on the back side, for example. So when we connected that to this radio, he was actually able to hear me, but I believe at a signal strength of 2S units. And he could identify that it was me, but he was only able to copy every few words. Could not hear him very well. He was coming through. I could identify that it was Mike. There was a lot of static. You heard that with test 3. So mostly a fail. It was an improvement over the omnidirectional antennas. Now, this is what blew my mind. When we switched the antenna over to the 2980, I was able to receive him with 7 S units on the meter. And I had no idea the fact that this radio would have that type of difference in its receive quality with the same antenna system. I mean, it was night and day. Go back and watch test 3 and test 4. In fact, all of the other tests on the receive side. So Mike basically indicated that that is pretty much likely to happen. This is a very, very wide-banded receiver, and that's why I also bought it. It is designed to go all the way down into HF to pick up AM broadcast stations for shortwave listening and all the way up. So it has, it's very sensitive to a very large set of frequencies, whereas my 2980 is just a single band radio. It only does 2 meters. So its filtering was noticed night and day. So that was a huge takeaway for me. I had no idea that switching the antenna from an HT that really was designed for really wideband receive would have that much of a difference on receive quality. So that's my biggest takeaway, and I'm just thankful for doing this exercise. Otherwise, I would have never known that. The other tests were interesting. So when we transitioned to the transmission side on the 2980, we'll go through some of the reports here. We found that when I was transmitting at 5 watts, he was able to copy me. He could tell it was me, but it wasn't a perfect signal, and I was reading 2 S units, so like 2 bars on his meter. When I bumped it up to 10 watts, doubling the power, I went up to, I think it was an S3, 3 S units. So it's a little bit higher than what the theory suggests. You actually need 2 doublings of power to go up 1 S unit. We were actually seeing more of a, every time I doubled the power, an increase of almost 1 S unit. So when we went to 30 watts from 10 watts, we jumped up to an S4. And then when I more than doubled the power from 30 watts to 80 watts, I was a solid S5. So we had very good communication quality going in both directions. Big takeaway here is purpose-built radio, 2 meter only rig. I had previously discounted it because I'm like, it only does 1 band, but by virtue of it only doing 1 band, it was a lot better in terms of what it was designed to receive on. So for 2 meter reception, that 2980 absolutely blew it out of the water. In fact, that radio is very high quality, has a lot of power, can be used in the shack, mobile, for a variety of applications. But it's also at a very good price point. I think I bought mine at $140 not too long ago. And at one point earlier in the year, it was $119. So very economical radio to get into. The antenna I have outside and my setup is very modest because I don't operate here too much. And essentially I have a painter's pole. It's the Mr. Long Arm, and it has 3 sections that are almost 8 foot apiece. I have mine at 16 feet, and then at the very top, I clamped on the Arrow 2 Yagi with 4 elements for 2 meters. And like I said, I had basically taken my Garmin GPS or Garmin watch and the compass, and I oriented the beam at Mike's bearing. I did that with some custom software that I actually wrote called MCOM Tools that has not been released, but really all it does is it knows where my GPS location is, the latitude and longitude. It has an offline call sign database of all of the registered FCC licensee holders, and then it basically will take the city you're in, the representative lat long, and then it will basically do the math to figure out what is the bearing. And I use that technique in the field. Now, until that software is released, you could also do the same thing with QRZ.com. The only difference there is I don't think QRZ you can change your location. My software actually uses the GPS and allows you to, wherever you move, to be able to change it. So that's how that was done. That's how I hoisted up the antenna and how I determined where to point it. Oh yeah, you know what? Here's some other metrics. So I decided to have my power meter connected. So for that entire exercise, we ended up talking for about 35 to 40 minutes. We were basically transmitting about equally 50-50 on each side. And I essentially went through about 3.6 amp hours, actually correction, 2.6 amp hours in that time. And then when I was running at 80 watts, which was most of the time, whenever I keyed up, I was putting out or drawing a proper 11 amps. So moral of the story is purpose-built radio for 2 meters, high power, directional antenna for that radio, having a plan, knowing where to point the antenna, and we were able to make a fairly reliable QSO 41 miles, which roughly takes us to that county level. I think we have 2, possibly 3 cities in between us, so you could probably apply these principles also to maybe GMRS. I don't know, since it is, I think, on the UHF side of things, what may vary, but the bottom line is experiment with your gear. Don't be afraid to try out different radios, power levels, antennas, and see what you're able to do in terms of your local communication needs. All right, so in the next video, I'm going to show you how I communicate with my wife when I'm in the backcountry and I don't have cell reception. Now, she is not a ham, so I'm actually going to use my radio, a special device, and I'm going to show you how to send SMS text messages so that you can actually stay in contact with your loved ones if only one of you is a ham. All right, guys, I'm the Tech Prepper. Be strong, be safe, and be prepared.
I have found my own experience that any handheld, any HT, when you put a more beefy antenna on it, you run the significant risk of it misbehaving, of it receiving too much, of it being deafened, of it getting a bunch of noise. So a handheld with a Yagi antenna, it seems like it should be just a regular radio, but in order to make the handheld small, one of the things that they sacrifice is the filtering. So it works just beautifully with a small built-on antenna. It can do some good with an external antenna, but you go with a high gain antenna,